Isaac Newton, From Fatherless Child to Genius. Isaac Newton. The Unseen Universe, Part 1. The Storm Before the Light, Childhood and Early Life. In a quiet corner of England, during one of the harshest winters in history, a child was born prematurely under a sky heavy with storm clouds. His name would soon echo through eternity: Isaac Newton. Woolsthorpe Manor, 1643. The fire crackled low in the hearth of a small rural home. Hannah Ayscough Newton, a widow in her early 20s, clutched the tiny bundle in her arms. The child weighed so little, she feared he wouldn't survive the night. Born on the 4th of January, 1643, the 25th of December, 1642, in the Julian calendar, in the village of Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth, Lincolnshire, Isaac Newton arrived fatherless, his namesake having died 3 months earlier. Rumors in the village were that the infant was no larger than a quart mug. Fragile, pale, nearly translucent, a miracle if he lived, a prodigy if he grew. The absence of a father, Isaac's early years were marked by silence and separation. At the age of 3, his mother remarried and left him in the care of his maternal grandmother. The emotional scar of abandonment would linger throughout his life, manifesting in a stoic, often cold temperament. He would write years later, "I am not afraid of him that has many books, but of him that has read only one and has let it possess him." A cryptic reflection of loneliness and singular focus. Early education. A young Isaac, quiet and awkward, preferred drawing, building mechanical models, and writing notes in the margins of his Bible over the games of village children. He built windmills powered by mice and sundials carved into stone. He was mocked at school, physically small, socially isolated, but something burned fiercely in his eyes. It wasn't strength or charm that set Newton apart. It was obsession. He didn't play. He studied the motion of shadows and the balance of weights. His notebooks from that time reveal a mind already questioning nature's invisible forces. The list of sins. In his 20s, Newton compiled a deeply personal document, a list of 48 sins he believed he had committed. Among them, making pies on Sunday night, threatening my stepfather and mother to burn them and the house over them, striking many, not the record of a saint, but of a conflicted soul, righteous and wrathful, curious and cruel. Isaac Newton was not merely brilliant, was dangerously human. Part 2. The Plague Years and Discovery. In 1665, death swept through England in waves of Black Plague. In London, the air reeked of decay. The streets were littered with the sick and the dying. Cambridge University shuttered its doors. Students fled. One of them was a 22-year-old Isaac Newton, returned to Woolsthorpe. The sky over Lincolnshire was heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Isaac returned to Woolsthorpe Manor. To the outside world, it was a retreat into isolation. But within that quiet, the world would be transformed. Between 1665 and 1667, during what he later called his Annus Mirabilis, his miracle year, Newton developed the foundations of 3 revolutionary fields: calculus, optics, and gravity. The shadow of light. By day, Newton would sit in the orchard. At night, he lit candles, ground glass lenses, and split beams of sunlight with prisms. He discovered that white light is not pure, but a blended spectrum of colors that can be split and rejoined. What we call color is the result of the interaction of light with matter. Newton didn't just study light, he redefined it. He challenged Aristotle, Descartes, and the teachings of the Church. His experiments suggested that vision was not a mystical power, but a physical process. It caused unease among those clinging to tradition. Though he feared controversy, Newton wrote with precision, yet he waited decades before publishing. He feared misunderstanding. or perhaps he feared being right too soon. The apple story, fact or fable? One evening in the orchard, legend has it that Newton watched an apple fall. Was it the apple that struck him more a deeper idea? Later in life, Newton shared the story of the apple with William Stukeley, a biographer. But he never claimed the fruit hit his head. The truth? The moment may not have been a single spark, but a slow-burning flame of questions. Why does the apple fall downward, not sideways? Why does the moon not fall to her? Could the same force bind planets and apples alike? I began to think of gravity extending to the orbit of the moon. The beginnings of calculus? Amid plague and isolation, Newton also began building a new mathematical language, fluxions, what we now call calculus. It allowed the measurement of change, motion, and curves. But Newton didn't publish. Years later, German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz would publish similar work. The battle over who discovered calculus would ignite one of the most bitter rivalries in scientific history. A mind in flames, Newton filled his journals with strange symbols, diagrams, and equations, but also alchemical symbols, religious interpretations, and secret codes. He was not just a scientist, was a mystic in secret. Truth is the offspring of silence and meditation. He believed in hidden forces. He searched for the philosopher's stone. He dissected the book of Revelation. To the public, Newton was a rising scholar. In private, he was peering into the soul of nature through the lenses of mathematics, religion, and magic alike. Returned to Cambridge. In 1667, Newton returned to Cambridge, bringing with him more than notebooks. He brought a new universe. He was elected Fellow of Trinity College. By 1669, he became Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, a title once held by Stephen Hawking centuries later. But Newton still hesitated to share. His ideas were too radical, too strange. He feared rejection. He feared ridicule. But soon, the world would have no choice but to listen. Part 3. Optics and Light. A Different Vision. In a world ruled by the senses, Newton sought to understand what lay beneath them. Light was not simply what we saw it, was a mystery waiting to be unraveled, and Newton would do just that. The Prism and the Spectrum, Int, Cambridge, Newton's Room, 1668. A ray of sunlight filters through a shutter. Newton places a glass prism in its path. The beam bursts into a rainbow across the walled, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. He places a second prism in the path of the colored light, and the colors recombine into white. Most believed that prisms colored light. Newton proved otherwise. Light itself contained the colors. He destroyed centuries of Aristotelian belief in a single stroke. The light of the sun is not a simple entity, but a compound of rays of differing refrangibility. The experiment was elegant. The result, revolutionary. The reflecting telescope. Cambridge workshop, night. Tools scattered, lenses shattered, mirrors polished in candlelight. Newton works feverishly. He realizes the problem with refracting telescopes. Light bends through lenses unevenly, distorting the image. The solution? Use mirrors instead. In 1668, Newton invents the first practical reflecting telescope. Small, efficient, and free of chromatic aberration, it astonishes his peers. Newton was no mere theorist. He built, tested, and refined. His telescope caught the attention of the Royal Society. For the first time, they wanted to know who this young mathematician truly was. Optics and the Firestorm. Newton finally publishes his work in Optics, 1704. He details the nature of light, reflection, refraction, and color. But the book was more than a scientific treatise, delved into particles of light, ether theories, and even spiritual reflections. Quote, Newton, Optics, Query 31. Does not gravity act upon light? Is not light itself a body? Newton's particle theory of light contradicted the wave theory proposed by Huygens. The scientific world was split. Debate raged for a century. And yet, even where Newton was wrong, he was generative. He forced questions no one had dared ask. The unofficial stories. In private, Newton performed experiments few knew about. He stared at the sun for hours until his vision blurred for the sake of understanding light and the eye. He inserted a bodkina blunt needle between his eye and its socket, distorting the shape of his eyeball to observe color perception. My sight became so impaired that I could scarcely look upon a candle. These weren't the actions of a detached scholar. They were the obsessive acts of a man chasing truth, no matter the pain. He was alone in his pursuit. But perhaps he wanted it that way. Obsession and withdrawal. Newton's relationships with colleagues deteriorated. He became paranoid, secretive, and harsh. He accused others of stealing ideas. He withdrew manuscripts before publishing. His letters grew curt. He began writing in codes. Behind the genius, there was darkness. Some say he suffered a mental breakdown in the early 1670s, a result of isolation, overwork, or mercury exposure from his alchemical experiments. And yet, even in his silence, his mind burned on. Part 4. Gravity and the Falling Apple, Truth or Myth. There is perhaps no image more iconic in the history of science than that of Isaac Newton sitting under an apple tree, struck by gravity and by revelation. But what really happened in that orchard? The orchard legend, Ext, Woolsthorpe Manor, apple orchard, dusk. The young Newton gazes up at the evening sky. An apple detaches silently from the branch and falls to the earth. Newton later described this moment not as a revelation, but as the start of a question. Why do apples always fall perpendicular to the ground? Why not sideways or upward? Is it not possible that the force which draws the apple downward also draws the moon toward the earth? He began to speculate that the same invisible force reaching across the orchard reached across the heavens. The laws of gravity. Newton's genius lay not in noticing the fall, but in asking what sustains the fall, what controls the path of the moon, the tides, and the stars. Int. Cambridge Study, 1666, 1684. He began formulating what would become the law of universal gravitation. Every mass attracts every other mass in the universe in direct proportion to their mass and inversely to the square of the distance between them. He didn't just explain why apples fall, he explained why planets orbit, why oceans swell, and why stars dance through the cosmos. A silent decade. Though he made his discoveries as early as the 1660s, Newton refused to publish. He hesitated, he feared criticism, he suspected betrayal. His ideas remained in notebooks, locked behind his solitude and suspicion. Newton once wrote, "I have not published my discoveries for fear that others would steal them." Even brilliance, it seemed, could be a prison. Halley's visit, a spark relit. In 1684, astronomer Edmund Halley visited Newton to ask a question. What shape would a planet's orbit take under an inverse square force of attraction? Without hesitation, Newton replied, "An ellipse." Shocked, Halley asked for proof. Weeks later, Newton produced the manuscript De Motu Corporum, in gyrum 3 cursor, to his magnum opus. Halley urged him to publish. Newton resisted, but slowly Newton began to let go of his silence. The Principia is born in 1687. Under Halley's patronage and persistence, Newton published Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, known simply as the Principia. It was a book that changed not just science, but how humans understood the universe. 3 laws that bind the universe. The Principia introduced 3 laws that remain fundamental even today. Law of inertia. An object remains at rest or in uniform motion unless acted upon by an external force. F equals ma, Force equals mass times acceleration, action and reaction. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It wasn't just about gravity. Newton unified terrestrial and celestial mechanics. He showed that the same rules applied to apples, cannons, planets, and stars. No one had ever done that before. Reception and revolt. While some hailed Newton as a genius, others met the Principia with resistance. Robert Hooke Newton's old rival accused him of plagiarism. Many scholars couldn't follow the mathematics. Some accused Newton of materialism, of removing God from the cosmos by reducing it to mere mechanics. But Newton pressed on. I do not feign hypotheses. He refused to speculate beyond what could be observed, measured, and proven. On new cosmos. The publication of the Principia was more than a scientific eventide, was a philosophical revolution. The universe was no longer governed by divine whim, was ruled by laws, discoverable and predictable. Newton did not destroy the divine, he recast it. For him, the precision of nature was not proof of randomness, but of an intelligent creator whose laws could be known, and Newton believed he had glimpsed them. Part 5. The Principia and the Laws that Changed the World. When Newton published the Principia in 1687, it did more than change science. It redrew the boundaries of what knowledge could be. For the first time in human history, the entire universe was seen as governed by mathematical law, the birth of a masterpiece. Int. Printing House, London, 1687. Stacks of thick parchment. Typesetters work by candlelight. Ink-stained fingers adjust the pages of Newton's manuscript, supervised by Edmund Halley himself. The Principia was nearly never printed. The Royal Society, bankrupt after publishing a costly history of fish, had no funds. Halley paid out of his own pocket. He knew the importance of what they were about to unleash. Structure and genius. The Principia was divided into 3 books. Book I, Mathematical Principles of Motion, Newton's 3 Laws. Book II, Fluid Dynamics and Resistance, the behavior of bodies moving through different mediums. Book III, The System of the World. Application of his laws to the heavens, planetary orbits, the moon's motion, comets and tides. It was dense, often opaque, and written in Latin. But beneath the difficult language was a message so clear that it shattered centuries of speculation. The motions of the planets and comets could be explained by the same laws which govern falling bodies on Earth. He had united earth and sky in one grand system. The reaction of the world. Int. Royal Society meeting, London. Scholars in wigs and robes debate fiercely. Some bow their heads in awe, others shake their fists in rage. The reception was electric. Some scientists called Newton a prophet. Others accused him of arrogance. Philosophers worried that Newton's clockwork universe left no room for God. The Cartesian model, reigning philosophy based on vortices and ether, was under attack, and Newton did not flinch. Robert Hooke's final attack. Hooke, once secretary of the Royal Society, had long claimed he discovered the inverse square law before Newton. Newton refused to credit him. Their feud turned bitter. Newton once said, Hooke's contributions were as the merest hint, nothing more. When Hooke died in 1703, Newton became president of the Royal Society and ensured no portrait of Hooke survived. It was Newton's revenge not with violence but with erasure. A kingdom of mathematics? The Principia inspired generations. Thinkers across Europe, Leibniz, Euler, Laplace, Lagrange expanded Newton's methods. Newtonian mechanics became the foundation for engineering, astronomy, and even military science. Ships crossed oceans with Newton's physics. Artillery was aimed using Newton's formulas. Clocks, compasses, and machines became precise. Newton didn't just describe nature, he tamed it. He gave humanity a toolbox to dominate the physical world. The Industrial Revolution began not with steam, but with equations, theology, and cosmic order. Despite accusations of materialism, Newton's faith ran deep. He believed that God created the universe and instilled it with rational laws. Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who sets them in motion. Newton saw his work as revealing the divine architecture of creation. But privately, he denied the Trinity, studied esoteric Christian texts, and predicted that the world would end around the year 2060. To Newton, science was not a replacement for faith. It was the language of God himself. The weight of legacy. By the late 1680s, Newton had done what no human before him had managed. He created a universal system. His name became legend. Universities taught his laws. Monarchs consulted him. Even rival scientists, grudgingly or admiringly, deferred to Mr. Newton. But Newton was never satisfied. He had conquered the heavens. Now he would plunge into the shadow alchemy, prophecy, secrecy, and control. Part 6. Rivalry with Leibniz. The calculus conflict. In science, as in war, the fiercest battles are often fought not with weapons, but with ideas. For Newton, his most bitter rivalry was not over physics, but over calculus. And his adversary was another genius, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Two minds, one discovery. Int. Berlin, 1670s. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, German philosopher, diplomat, mathematician, scribbles rapidly. He has developed a system of infinitesimals. He calls it calculus. Int. Cambridge. Same time. Newton works silently. He has developed his own system of Fluxionschi's term for calculus, but he refuses to publish. Two men working independently, two discoveries, one firestorm. Newton first developed his method in the mid-1660s, but kept it hidden. Leibniz, unaware of Newton's unpublished notes, published his version in 1684. The calculus war had begun. A question of priority. At first, the overlap seemed like coincidence. But as Newton's followers saw Leibniz gain credit across Europe, they grew furious. Newton, ever suspicious, believed Leibniz had stolen his ideas. Quote, Newton, private letter. He who speaks of infinitesimals speaks in a barbarous manner. Newton publicly said nothing, but privately he began to plan intellectual revenge. The accusations. In 1699, Nicolas Faccio de Douillet, a Swiss mathematician close to Newton, openly accused Leibniz of plagiarism. Leibniz denied the charge, but by 1704, Newton published his optics, including an appendix outlining his calculus, just to reassert priority. The dispute moved from theory to ideology. Britain embraced Newton, the continent, Leibniz. Letters flew, accusations deepened. The Committee of Vengeance. In 1711, the Royal Society established a committee to investigate the matter of priority. What was not revealed to the public. Isaac Newton himself wrote the final report. It concluded, unsurprisingly, that Newton was the true inventor of calculus, and Leibniz had plagiarized. It was science's first major scandal, not over data, but credit. Not over facts, but fame. Leibniz's last days. Int. Hanover, 1716. Leibniz, aging, ill, and discredited in England, writes a final letter defending himself. Few respond. He dies in near obscurity. Only one person attends his funeral. Meanwhile, Newton's star continues to rise. The irony? Today, historians agree. Both men discovered calculus independently. But Newton's secrecy, pride, and influence had reshaped the narrative for centuries. Two visions of truth. Newton's version of calculus used geometric motion and Fluxions's ideal for physics. Leibniz used symbolic notation and dA, that would become the standard in mathematics. In the end, both were essential. Newton built the physics of reality. Leibniz built the language to describe it. Their conflict, though tragic, pushed both fields further than either man might have done alone. The weight of ego, Newton's need for control, his distrust of others, and his obsession with legacy drove him to tarnish another genius's name. It is the weight of authority, not truth, that often governs. He did not invent rivalry, but Newton mastered it: alchemy, mysticism, and secret studies. While the world hailed Newton as a scientific messiah, few knew the truth of his private obsessions, secret experiments in alchemy, cryptic studies of biblical prophecy, and quests for the lost language of God. Newton didn't merely want to understand nature, he wanted to unlock it. The hidden laboratory, int, Woolsthorpe Manor, basement room, night, candles flicker, glass vials bubble, strange powders are measured with trembling precision. Newton alone records chemical reactions, ancient symbols, and coded passages from alchemical texts. Between the 1660s and 1690s, Newton wrote over 1 million words on alchemia science that most modern thinkers dismissed as superstition. But to Newton, alchemy was not a fantasy. It was a key, perhaps the key to the true nature of matter, a search for the philosopher's stone. Newton believed the ancients had hidden powerful truths in metaphor. He read Zosimos, Geber, and Paracelsus. He studied texts written in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. His goal? To discover the philosopher's stonia substance said to turn base metals into gold. To understand the spirit behind material things. All matter may be transmutable. The distinction between the physical and the spiritual is an illusion. He believed matter was imbued with divine essence, that the transformation of lead into gold mirrored the transformation of the soul. Dangerous experiments, int. Cambridge study, late night, mercury vapor rises unseen from a crucible. Newton breathes deeply, unaware of the long-term effects. Historians now believe Newton may have suffered from mercury poisoning during these years leading to paranoia, withdrawal, and a possible mental breakdown in the 1670s. He wasn't just risking his reputation, he was risking his mind. Biblical Prophecy and the End of Days, int. Dark Library, London, 1690s. Newton pores over the Book of Daniel and Revelation, measuring the Temple of Solomon, calculating the return of Christ, and searching for hidden timelines. He writes in secret that the world as we know it will end around the year 2060. There is a God who created all things and governs them, but he does so by the laws he himself has set. To Newton, science and faith were never enemies. They were two languages speaking of the same truth. Heresy and hidden beliefs. Newton rejected the Trinitya dangerous position in 17th century England. He considered the Nicene Creed a corruption of original Christianity. He never married, never confided these thoughts to many. His writings on theology and alchemy remained hidden until centuries after his death. Newton was not just a physicist. He was a theologian, a hermeticist, and a rebel against the religious orthodoxy of his day. The Alchemist's Code. His notebooks are filled with references to the green lion, the red dragon, and the blood of the sun. These weren't fantasies. They were symbols in alchemical code metaphors for transformation, purification, and enlightenment. To Newton, science did not disprove the mystical, it confirmed it. Why he hid it? Newton feared public ridicule. The Royal Society had no tolerance for irrational pursuits. So he published Physics and Optics, but he kept alchemy and prophecy locked away, buried in trunks and ciphered journals, hidden for centuries. Only in the 20th century, when economist John Maynard Keynes acquired some of Newton's papers, did the world learn the truth. Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians. Part 8. Newton the Man. Personality, isolation, and eccentricity. Behind the legendary equations and radiant discoveries was a man shaped by solitude, intensity, and contradictions. Isaac Newton's inner world was not made of stars and light, but of secrets, silence, and a relentless need for control. The lonely child becomes the lonely genius. Ext. Woolsthorpe Manor, childhood. Abandoned by his mother at age 3, Newton was raised by his grandmother. The trauma left deep emotional scars. He rarely trusted others. He avoided intimacy. He hated confrontation, but hated being challenged even more. Newton was not known for warmth. He was not gregarious or charismatic. His genius grew in the shadows, nurtured by self-reliance and an obsessive will. Few friends, many rivals. Newton had few lasting friendships. Even allies like Edmund Halley, John Locke, and Nicolas Facio de Douillet would, at times, find themselves estranged. Rivalries dominated his adult life, with Robert Hooke over optics and gravity, with Leibniz over calculus, with Flamsteed, the astronomer royal, over astronomical data. He once wrote, "If I have done the public any service, it is due to my patient thought, not to any cheerfulness in conversation." The list of sins revisited. Newton's early list of sins, written when he was around 19, reveals a tortured conscience. Making pies on Sunday night, punching my sister, threatening my stepfather to burn him and the house over him. These were not confessions of petty guilt, but signs of deep moral struggle. Newton's genius did not exempt him from darkness. It deepened it. He saw himself as chosen but feared damnation. Obsessive traits. Newton kept records of every penny he spent. He often worked for days without sleep, skipping meals and human interaction. Once, while boiling an egg during an experiment, he became so distracted that he boiled his watch instead. His notebooks reveal precise weather log, sleep patterns, lists of people he distrusted. He never married. He never had children. He never left England. He lived not for pleasure, but for purpose. The universe was his companion, and discovery his obsession. Depression and breakdown. In the 1670s, Newton experienced a mental crisis. Letters suggest paranoia, hallucinations, and a complete emotional collapse. He accused friends of conspiring against him. He withdrew from society entirely. Modern scholars believe mercury poisoning from alchemical experiments may have contributed to his decline. But he recovered and returned, more powerful than before. The mask in public, int. Royal Society meeting, early 1700s. By now, Newton was a public figure, polished, stately, silver-haired, seated at the head of the table as president of the Royal Society. But the man behind the mask remained wary. He controlled what was published. He edited papers, often inserting his own judgments. He blacklisted dissenters. He changed votes. Newton didn't seek fame. He sought dominance over truth, not because he was arrogant, but because he believed no one else could be trusted with it. Eccentricity in daily life. Newton once got lost walking home, forgetting where he lived while thinking about a math problem. He regularly mumbled to himself. He never had artwork in his home. His rooms were filled with instruments, papers, and books, but no decorations. His favorite pastime? Watching the moon through a telescope for hours in total silence. His view of himself. In his final years, Newton wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." Even after reshaping the universe, Newton saw himself not as a master but a seeker. He did not chase greatness. He chased the mystery that greatness left behind. Part 9. Years at the Royal Mint, from scientist to bureaucrat. In 1696, Isaac Newton entered an unexpected chapter of his life, not in the laboratory, but in the heart of Britain's financial system. He left Cambridge for London to become Warden of the Royal Mint. It was supposed to be a ceremonial role. Newton turned it into a campaign for economic justice and personal power. London Calling. Int. Tower of London, Royal Mint, 1696. The clanging of hammers. The smell of molten metal. Coins are struck under the eyes of corrupt officials and counterfeiters. England's currency is in chaos. The government faces a national crisis. Coins are clipped, melted down, and counterfeited. Confidence in money is vanishing. Enter Newton. Appointed by political patronage, Newton saw more than a bureaucratic posse, saw a chance to bring the same precision and order to currency that he had brought to the stars. Reforming the coinage, Newton launched a sweeping reform, the Great Recoinage of 1696. He oversaw the collection of old, debased coins, the restriking of coins with milled edges, a crackdown on dishonest mint employees. He demanded exact weights, sharp engravings, and clean metal composition. For Newton, a coin wasn't just currency, it was a promise of order, and no promise should be made carelessly. Hunting counterfeiters. But Newton didn't stop at policy. He went undercover, interviewing witnesses, interrogating suspects, and tracking criminals across London taverns and alleys. He built a network of informants, studied forged dies, and filed over 100 depositions. From alchemy to astronomy, from theology to tracking criminals, Newton's mind adapted to every battlefield. His most notorious target, William Chaloner, a master forger? The Fall of Chaloner. Int. Old Bailey Courtroom, 1699. Chaloner stands accused of treason minting his own coins, impersonating mint officials, and defrauding the government. Newton presents evidence with cold precision. Chaloner pleads innocence, claiming Newton is framing him. It doesn't matter. He is hanged for high treason. Newton didn't gloat. He didn't speak of justice. He simply returned to his desk. Another threat to order removed? Master of the Mint. In 1699, Newton was promoted to Master of the Royal Mint, a position he held until his death. Established uniform standards for coin production, innovations in metal mixing, measures to prevent future fraud. Newton's work saved the English economy. He transformed the mint into a model of precision and efficiency, not by force but by numbers. The gold standard. In 1717, Newton issued a report setting the official value of the guinea at 21 shillings. This act laid the foundation for what would eventually become the gold standard. Quote, Historian V.O. With that single report, Newton changed the financial architecture of the Western world. Scientist turned statesman. By the early 1700s, Newton was Master of the Mint, President of the Royal Society, knighted by Queen Anne, 1705, revered across Europe. He had moved from scholar to symbol of intellect, of empire, of British power. Yet Newton remained a man of paradox, a mystic who ruled the markets, a solitary thinker who governed institutions, a servant of order who believed in hidden truths. Private life in public role. Newton never married. He lived with his niece, Catherine Barton, known for her wit and beauty. Some speculated about her influence. Others whispered about Newton's emotional distance, perhaps even his asexuality. He had power, but remained emotionally unknowable. His daily routine was one of habit, calculation, and ritual. He walked alone through London streets, observed, measured, balanced the laws of matter with the chaos of men. Part 10. The Legacy, Death, and the Unfinished Mysteries. By the 1720s, Isaac Newton had become more than a man. He was a monument, a myth, a living relic of the scientific revolution. But even as his body aged and his fame grew, the questions he wrestled with remained unfinished. The final years. Int. London residence, 1720s. Newton, now in his 80s, walks slowly through his study. His once fiery gaze is dimmed, but still alert. He continues to correct manuscripts, respond to correspondence, and attend Royal Society meetings. His health declines. Gout pains him. His memory fades. His once sharp logic occasionally stutters, but he still refuses rest. He was the president of the Royal Society for nearly 25 years. No one dared challenge him. Some admired him, others feared him. He was called the English Archimedes, the death of a colossus. Int. London, bedroom, night, the 20th of March, 1727. Newton lies motionless. He suffers severe abdominal pain. His niece tends to him. He whispers little. At 84 years old, he dies in his sleep. No children, no spouse, only equations, ideas, and silence. The man who decoded the heavens left no heir, only a blueprint of how to pursue truth. A funeral fit for kings, Newton is given a state funerale, rare honor for a commoner. His body is carried by nobles, buried in Westminster Abbey near kings and queens. Voltaire, who witnessed the funeral, remarked, "England has a mathematician as its hero." The vaults of memory. After his death, his unpublished papers were examined. What they found shocked the world. More than 10 million words in alchemy, biblical prophecy, early church heresies, secret codes, ancient history, and natural magic. The public had known Newton as the rationalist, the scientist, the lawgiver, but he was also a mystic, a magician, a man who sought not only how the universe worked, but why. The private universe. Among Newton's notebooks were detailed prophecies interpreting the Book of Revelation, diagrams of the Temple of Solomon, chemical recipes including how to make the tree of gold, calculations predicting the apocalyptic year of 2060, quote, John Maynard Keynes, V.O. Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians. Influence across time. Newton's ideas would echo for centuries. Inspired Einstein, who said, "Newton, forgive me," built the foundation for classical mechanics still taught today, transformed our understanding of motion, gravity, optics, and finance. Even as quantum physics and relativity challenged his universe, Newton remained the scaffolding of science. Modern debates and psychological profiles. Modern scholars debate Newton's personality. Was he autistic, asexual, paranoid, traumatized? Was his solitude a wounder, a weapon? Historians remain divided, but all agree on one truth. Newton's mind was not ordinary. It was a force of nature unto itself. The unfinished work, despite his genius, Newton never completed. A unified theory of forces. A solution to the nature of light. A true reconciliation between science and God, but perhaps he never meant to. I do not know what I may appear to the world. His final words are uncertain, but his legacy is not. Epilogue. A single man, a universe revealed. Isaac Newton left no children, no memoirs, and few confessions. What he left was a method. Question everything. Seek the laws beneath appearance. Publish only what endures. He did not seek popularity, he sought permanence. His name carved into the stone of Westminster reads, "Here lies Sir Isaac Newton, who by a strength of mind almost divine, and mathematical principles peculiar to himself, explored the course and figures of the planets, the paths of comets, the tides of the sea, the dissimilarities in rays of light, and the properties of colors. Let mortals rejoice that such an ornament of the human race has existed.